The public that it will fully implement President Duterte's order to stop e-sabong operations in the country. An official of the gaming regulator says the government stands to lose more than 600 million pesos a month from the president's directive.
The leadership of Iglesia ni Cristo formally endorses Uniteam standard bearer Bongbong Marcos and his running mate Mayor Sara Duterte.
A think tank says the next president needs to build on economic reforms started by the Duterte administration to sustain recovery from the pandemic.
We begin our broadcast with PAGCOR assuring the public that it will implement President Duterte's order to stop e-sabong operations in the country.
The PNP also vowed to strictly monitor the directive's implementation. Maricel Halili with the rest of the story.
After defending e-sabong in March, citing the government's multi-million earnings from its operations, President Duterte has decided to put a stop to e-sabong immediately. In his public address aired on Tuesday, Duterte said that a memorandum will be issued based on the recommendation of the Interior Department.
The recommendation of Secretary Anyo is to do away with e-sabong. And he cited the validation report of coming from all sources. And I agree with it. So e-sabong will end. It was working against our values and yung impact sa pamilya pati sa tao.
The president's ally, Senator De La Rosa, and other officials in the Senate have earlier recommended the suspension of e-sabong. This following the disappearance of more than 30 cockpit enthusiasts since April of last year. In a statement, De La Rosa said that senators were never wrong in urging PAGCOR to stop e-sabong. PAGCOR, on the other hand, assures the public that they are going to implement the president's decision. They will inform the Audit Commission that revenues will no longer be collected from e-sabong operations. The National Police also assure that they will strictly monitor the directive's implementation.
We will wait for the official communication kung paano po ba natin isasagawa yung pag-inspect at pag-monitor, particularly those mga isabong at isabong betting station para po hindi po magkaroon ng kaguluhan.
Meanwhile, business tycoon Atong Ang, who owns one of the e-sabong licensees, Lucky 8 Star Quest, said that they respect Duterte's decision.
Kami po sa Pitmaster ay sumusunod sa tawag ng ating Pangulo at kusa kaming titigil ngayong gabi kahit wala pa ang kautusan ng PAGCOR.
For News 5, Maricel Halili, We Are One News.
A PAGCOR official says that the government may lose as much as 640 million pesos in revenue a month following President Duterte's order to end e-sabong operations in the country. In an interview with The Big Story, PAGCOR licensing group Vice President Joey Tria said there had been 4 e-sabong licenses left in the country when President Duterte made the call to end their operations. Tria also pointed out that e-sabong patrons will probably just look for other gambling activities that they could play.
We are earning about more or less 640 million a month from e-sabong. So yun po yung mawawala nating income. Actually po, ang concern nga natin dyan is once you stop regulating it, and it will also of course pave the way again for the illegal gaming activities. Kasi it's always possible that the patrons of e-sabong will look towards other gaming activities na pwede nilang laruin.
It's official, the Iglesia ni Cristo, known for its block voting practice, has endorsed the Marcos-Sara tandem.
Now, experts say this endorsement further solidifies support for the Uniteam. Jenny Dongan with the report.
Religious group Iglesia ni Cristo has formally announced that they're endorsing former Senator Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and Davao City Mayor Sara Duterte as their president and vice president of choice. The Christian denomination announced their bets in their TV channel's newscast Tuesday night. In a video message, Marcos Jr. and Duterte thanked INC for their endorsement.
Sisikapin po namin na ang tiwalang ipinagkaloob nyo sa aming tambalan ay magbubunga ng tunay na pagkakaisa ng mga Pilipinong nagmamahal sa Pilipinas.
Ang pagpili sa amin ni Apo Bongbong Marcos ay isang malaking karangalan na may kaakibat na hamong nakatuon sa aming kakayahang mapag-isa ang bansa.
The INC also encouraged their members to vote for some of Uniteam's senatorial bets, particularly for Jingo Estrada, Win Gatchalian, Mark Villar, Mig Zubiri, Lauren Ligarda, and guest candidate Robin Padilla. Former VP Giorgio Binay, Alan Peter Cayetano, Guillermo Eliazar, JV Ejercito, Joel Villanueva, and Chase Escudero also got the INC's endorsement. The 107-year-old church is known for their block voting, which is why their endorsements are much anticipated elections after elections. Some political analysts believe that the INC's endorsement is a big boost for the campaign of Uniteam.
We expect if it's a solid vote in a very tight race, that would be very positive kung sino man ang kandidato. In this case, kung ito ay ang kanilang opisyal na ilalabas, Marcos, Sara Duterte, makatutulong ito to concretize yung suporta para sa tambalang unity.
In tight elections, halimbawa, medyo dikit according to the two reputable survey firms, that can probably make a difference.
Recent PSA data shows that more than 2 million people are members of the Iglesia ni Cristo. Strat-based ADR Institute says the INC equates to 1% of the total election votes. This means that more than 600,000 INC members will be voting next week. For News 5, Jenny Dongon, We Are One News.
Global Source Partner says the next Philippine president will need to build on the economic reforms of the Duterte administration to sustain pandemic recovery. The think tank says if pre-election survey frontrunner Bongbong Marcos wins next week, he will need to quickly assure markets that he has a cohesive economic plan and a competent team to implement it. That's if he wants the economy to return to sustaining the 6 to 7% pre-pandemic growth rates. Global Source Partners pointed out that Marcos Jr. has yet to present a coherent economic program, which leaves observers guessing whether it is safe to bet policy continuity under the new administration. Now, if surveys are to be believed, and if the numbers hold through come May 9, then Marcos Jr. win might just be in the offing. What does that mean for an economy that is in need of some heavy lifting? Let's get insights from Mike Ricafort, Chief Economist at RCBC. Good morning, Sir Mike. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, good morning, Jess and Danny.
Okay, again, Sir Mike, recent Pulse Asia survey pointing to a Marcos win. Is this something that the financial markets has already fully priced in? And what risks are we looking at here as he, over the past months of the campaign, laid out a well-thought-out plan?
Well, some of the credit rating agencies and market makers have already priced in that possibility. Although, as a matter of prudence, investors would remain on a wait-and-see attitude because it's, of course, the actual election outcome, it could still vary compared to, say, what the surveys may indicate. So it's not always conclusive. That's why there's that prudence of waiting for the election results first. Well, first step is to have a credible, peaceful, orderly elections. So that's the first step. Well, that's very important also as part of the democratic process, as the whole world would like to see. And of course, the next step is whoever wins the presidency. Well, what would be first? What would be the who will be the economic team rather? What would be the reform measures, the policies? Well, including foreign policy, governance, and more importantly, from the point of view of global investors, they have been very particular about compliance with ESG standards, environment, society, and governance. So it all starts and ends with good governance, stronger institutions, rule of law, sustainability. So those factors would be taken into consideration because if you look at those are the variables that would really be dependent on who wins. Then and of course, but there are other attributes of the country that would remain intact regardless of who wins. Like
Yes.
the fact that
Sir, that's
Yeah, go
exactly
ahead,
what
Dan.
I wanted to ask you, sir, because we've had so many different kinds of presidents. We've had revolutions, we've had impeachments, we've had the Asian financial crisis, and yet we've managed naman to grow above 6%. But now it's a
Regardless.
different story because, of course, we're coming from a mountain of debt during the COVID-19 pandemic. Sir, will there be a difference if there is one president over another in terms of achieving the growth targets that we had pre-pandemic, or are you certain or at least assured that regardless naman, as long as we have an economic team in place, things will be as usual, business as usual?
Yeah, true, Danny. It's really mixed on that. Well, first, what would be the proactive reforms, the proactive policies that would really spell the difference on a per candidate basis? And second, of course, the attributes that would of the country, the competitive advantages of the country that would remain the same. Like, for instance, the country's demographics, relatively favorable, 12 largest economy, or 12 largest population in the world, 110 million, the second biggest BPO in the world after India, the biggest call center operations in the world, the country being the fourth the fourth biggest in terms of remittances from overseas workers, and so on. So those positive competitive advantages of the country would remain the same, business as usual. So at the very least, the minimum of encouraging and allowing businesses and investments, policies that continue to be friendly to doing business. So those competitive advantage to continue. But of course, there are many proactive measures that have to be done because the country came from a pandemic. We have seen increased borrowings for COVID-19 programs and response. We have seen the debt to GDP rising 60.5% by
Sir
end
Mike,
of last year. Go ahead, Dajess.
speaking of policy, Sir Mike, I mean, you have Ferdinand Marcos Jr. here running on a certain pledge here, should he become president. That, of course, is the vow to bring down the the price of rice to 20 to 30 pesos per kilo. How fiscally sound is that proposal, and does that have the potential to sink us further into debt?
Fiscal policy is very important right now because maybe one of the ways to do it is for the government to provide more subsidies. And that would be, of course, added to the cost of the government. And that would mean wider budget deficits and more borrowings, more debt. Because the reality is right now, especially when the peg is the global commodity prices. And we have seen the increase in the cost of production of, say, rice and other agricultural products, higher prices of fertilizers. If you look at the global price of rice also, what's doing in the world market, the cost of labor, the cost of transportation, and so on. The reality is, would suggest that there would be challenges in really bringing down the price of rice. And it would definitely require more government intervention and spending. So, especially now that this is very important because it affected all countries around the world, the pandemic, and that resulted to bigger debt. And there's a need, if economic conditions improve, there's a need to repay those debts, especially for the next president, the next administration. When economic times are better, there would be a need to intensify tax collections, just like what we have seen over the past 10 to 20 years, when debt to GDP ratio was successfully brought down from a high of 70 levels almost 20 years ago down to the low of 39.6% in 2019 prior to the pandemic. So,
Yes.
and of course, beyond that, it would also include tax reform measures, fiscal reform measures that would
Okay. So a
increase
lot
the
of
recurring
challenges,
purpose.
Sir Mike,
Actually, we
still
could go
even
on with this
specifically
discussion
with
forever.
even that the bringing down the price of rice, ang daming naka-surround po just to be able to bring that to fruition. But as you mentioned, hopefully with a strong economic team, the growth targets can be achieved if there's, of course, fiscal soundness and good governance. Thank you so much, RCBC Chief Economist Mike Ricafort.
Now, coming right up after the break, we'll check how our local bourse is performing as trading resumes this morning.
More of that and other stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
And you're still watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel.
All right, Dan, before we turn almost exclusively domestic, there are some big offshore issues still on the table. How are equities doing ahead of that Fed decision?
All right. right, Jess. Well, like you mentioned, we're all eyes are on elections, but there is a major thing that's going to be happening today over in the U.S. Investors are braced for the largest Fed rate hike since 2000. So that's expected to hike 50 basis points today. And key to the market outlook is just the hawkishness of Chair Powell and how he's going to be fighting off that inflation over in the U.S. And you can see equities actually climbing on the back of that. You do have in the Asia markets, Japan and China still closed for holidays, but at least the equity space over in Wall Street was in positive territory. Now, I'm going to pull out our chart to see how we are going in the opposite direction. Take a look at that slide that we've been seeing, and analysts have even warned that we might be hitting 6,500 levels. We seem to be well on our way to that level, down by 1 1/10% in just the first 30 minutes of trade here, Jess. I'm going to be showing you the movers here. You can see Globe Telecom down by 2 8/10%. A lot of eyes are on those issues regarding GCash, possibly, that of course Globe owns a stake in, and just a mishmash of the movers here that are going against the tide. But I do want to highlight one key issue, which is the peso, which is the weakest that we've seen since at least 3 years. So you can see that trend right here. This trend, upward trend, actually means that the peso is weakening. And of course, we are bracing for the inflation data of April coming out tomorrow. And we do have most of the analysts saying that this will be around 4.6%. That's the median estimate, well beyond the 4% threshold of the central bank, Jess.
Okay, Dan, we spoke about build, needing to continue with the next administration, and one of the flagship projects has finally been awarded. Tell us more about that.
Exactly, Jess, and that is, of course, Megawide. They have received the notice of award for the Philippine Subway project. They will be venturing to build 2 stations and tunnels of the Manila Subway, and you can see that going against the red tide of the index. Megawide up by 0.2%, trading at 5 pesos and 5 centavos, Jess.
All right, and that's a first look into the business day this Wednesday, May 4, 2022. Join us again tomorrow at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News Live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.